Number 1. Dating. This is a really messed up story that has taken me a very long time to share with anyone. But as long as you keep it anonymous, I have no problem telling you about it. It wasn't so long ago, so we all had smartphones pretty much like we do now. It's sort of important to know that. Over the summer one year, I went to stay with my aunt and her kids. They lived in the suburbs of Chicago. I grew up in the country out in West Virginia, so it was pretty cool. I was going to get a job over the summer, so I would have a lot of money to do all the things I wanted to do during my senior year at high school. I got a job at Six Flags, and boy did they make you work back in the day. I was put on games in the busiest games section of the park. I would often spend 12 hours working there, and it was really exhausting. A week into my time there, I had a guy come up to me several times. It was the ring toss game, which was the one that seemed to get the least wins, but he kept coming back over and over again. I was under the presumption that he was interested in me. As the night took over the park, it was quite a sight that I would never have seen in West Virginia. The lights were bright, the games were loud, but eventually people began to leave the park, and the commotion slowed down. When we were about a half hour from closing, there were less people in the games section, as it was in the back of the park. But that guy walked up and finally introduced himself. His name was Paul, and we talked for a bit. He asked me what school I went to, and I let him know I was from out of town. He wondered if we could get together after work got off. My aunt was not very strict about being home, so I did. Paul was pretty neat. He was very confident. He had a really nice car. He tended to talk a lot too. For a few weeks we went out nearly every night that I was working, and spent a few days together when I had them off. He was a lot of fun. After those weeks though, something weird happened. He had a season's pass to the park, and normally would be there all the time. However, he didn't show up one day. I didn't call him or anything. I didn't want to be needy. But after a day turned into a week, and then a week and a half, things started worrying me. I mean, mostly I just told myself that he got bored and wanted to dump me without telling me to my face. Whenever I tried to call him on his phone, it would always go right to voicemail. And then, after about a week and a half, I saw him hanging out in the park again. Only this time, there was something different about him. He didn't seem as confident as he had before. He actually seemed a bit nervous. I assumed he realized he had made a mistake ignoring me and was trying to make up for it. I wasn't really angry at him, so after a while, I waved him over, and he came over and we talked. I let him know I wasn't upset, and he wondered if I would want to go out with him again. I agreed, and told him that I could go after I get off work. He asked when that would be, and I thought that was weird. I told him it was the time I always get off work. I told him to just meet me back here, when the park was going to close. Anyway, when I got off work, we walked to his car. It was a nice car, but it was not the same one. I asked him what happened to it, and he told me he had gotten into a wreck, which was the major reason we hadn't been talking. That right there, although making me concerned about him, also explained why he had been acting so weird. After spending some time together just cruising, Paul pulled off into a gas station to get some gas. It was prepay, and they didn't have a card reader, so I went in to pay and get us some drinks. While Paul was gone, I heard a ringtone. I looked and noticed that he had left his smartphone in the seat of his car, but that wasn't what scared me. The caller ID on the phone listed the call as coming from Paul. Quickly grabbing my own phone, I noticed that the number on the ID was the number Paul had given me. I really didn't know what to do at first, but at the last moment I grabbed the phone and connected the call. I did not speak though, but the person on the other end sounded exactly like Paul, and he asked, "Pete, where the hell are you? I've been trying to get in touch with you all day." I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. I just quickly hung the phone up. A thought occurred to me, and I picked up my phone and looked his name up on Facebook. I hadn't done this before simply because I don't like Facebook, and people's need to tell me their favorite show will come on in about 10 minutes is all I ever see on Facebook. Sure enough, I found Paul's profile, and his profile picture was of him, and the guy I could only assume was his identical twin brother, Pete, the person I had been spending my evening with. Now, it might be difficult for you to understand why this freaked me out, but trust me, it did. Not only had I spent the evening with someone who was pretending to be his twin brother, but Paul's comment on the phone made me believe that Paul didn't even know his twin brother was doing this. When Pete came back, I was pretty nervous. I had no idea that if he was dishonest enough to do what he was doing, who knows what else he'd be capable of doing. I was able to convince Pete that I was not feeling well, and asked if he could take me home. I told him the following day was my day off, and we could do something then. He asked me when, and I told him I'd give him a call when I knew for sure. I could tell he was very disappointed with that answer. He knew that I would be talking to his brother, and must have been trying to decide what to do next. He offered to just call me tomorrow, and I decided to let him think that would happen. He finally took me home. I called Paul and got his voicemail. I told him about what happened, and that I would really appreciate neither brother bugging me at work ever again. I never heard or saw them ever again. Number 2. I'm not sure how scary this is to anyone else, but this is easily one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. When I was 16, I moved halfway across the country to a bigger city. It was so much larger than my previous town, and also much friendlier. Right away, I got back into my habit of taking long walks that I had started at my previous house. That way I could get exercise, listen to music, and even explore the new neighborhood. Unfortunately, as someone who was pretty busy, the only time I could take walks was after dinner. Honestly, as a female, it was slightly intimidating to be in unfamiliar places by myself, especially when I didn't know anyone who I could get help from. We had a dog I could have brought, but she was old and tended to pass out when she walked too long, so I didn't want to risk it. However, I soon grew accustomed to it just being me, even later at night. One day, I walked nearly all the way to my siblings' elementary school, which was 2 miles away, and that's when I walked past a certain house. Standing in the driveway was a man. He was smoking and leaning against the wall of the house, staring out at the side of the road that the house faced. As I walked by, the guy then put out a cigarette, crushing it on the ground, and turned to face me. "Hello," he called out in a thick accent. I said hello back. His neighbors did try to talk to me sometimes, so it wasn't weird, though usually the headphones implied that I didn't want to be bothered. He wasn't ready to give up, though. "What is your name?" he asked. I told him a nickname that I rarely use. "That is beautiful," he professed. "I'd like to be your friend." I just smiled and nodded, trying not to be rude since English clearly wasn't his first language, though I had no intention of being friends with a man I'd never met before. I also stand out quite a bit since I dress in an elegant goth style with long skirts and lace, which tends to attract a lot of attention. So it wasn't too odd that he had noticed me. But all that changed in the next second when he instructed, "Give me your phone number." I froze, definitely not wanting to give him my phone number. "I don't know my number." He didn't believe me at first, but he finally accepted it, annoyed. "Oh, then I'll give you my number," he decided. I have to get home soon," I lied again. "It's almost 9 o'clock, and I have to be home by then. Sorry, maybe later." He was pretty mad, but I walked away, not even daring to look him in the eye. Now, if it had ended there, it wouldn't be scary, just odd. However, that wasn't my last encounter with him. A few months after that, I went on another walk towards the elementary school. I had been on that route several more times before, and I hadn't even seen the guy, so I assumed it was safe. And this time, it wasn't summer. It was October, and almost 9 o'clock happened when it was a lot darker. So when it happened the first time, it was still light, but now it was nearly pitch black. I had misjudged how quickly the walk would go, and now I was stuck in the dark. So when I passed the house again on the way back to my house, the man was standing there, once again, smoking. just like before. He put out the cigarette. I tried not to look. He then called out the name I'd given him, which scared me, but I just kept walking. Maybe my courage was enough to talk to him in the evening, but not in the dark. He called it out again, then added, "Come here." By this point I had crossed the side street that his house faced, and I thought I was kind of safe. At least he wouldn't leave the yard, right? When he was quiet for a while, and I had made a little distance, I turned to see what he was doing. And to my horror, he was getting in his car. His headlights came on, and his car went into reverse, backing up at a speed I hadn't expected. Now, the sidewalk I was on had a fence on one side, and the other had the open road. The other side of the road had a baseball field, so there was nowhere to hide. And then I ran. The first place I could find was some bushes outside someone else's house, about 30 feet from the man's house. I ducked behind them and stayed there as the car finally whirled past my hiding place. I stayed there for about 10 minutes, desperately making sure the car didn't come back. I had no idea of his intentions. They likely weren't good. Well, by this time, it was past 9, and I had to get home. I crept out of the bushes and walked back down the street. Now, I knew, as well as you've probably realized, that if the car went that way, it had to come back at some point. So until I got to a roundabout that separated into 4 roads, I scanned the face of every driver that came by, attempting to stay in the shadows. I got home safe, only a little past 9, and I didn't tell my parents what had happened. A couple years or so later, I decided to walk to a grocery store, even though the only way to get there was to walk past his house. I was a little scared, but I figured it had been a while, so it wouldn't be a huge deal, and I'd just avoid that side of the road. Well, when I walked past his house, the garage door was open, but it was fine. I didn't see anyone. That is, until I saw something small moving around towards the ceiling of the garage. At first I thought it was a kite or something, but no, it was a hand, sticking out of the door and waving to me, with the person's body nowhere in sight. I kept walking, and eventually I turned around to check. Yep, there was the rest of the person, standing on the edge of the curb and waving to me with his whole arm. I shuddered and kept walking, repeatedly checking to make sure he wasn't following me. He wasn't following me this time, but I kept my phone open in case I needed to call 911 or my family. I still live in that house, but I refuse to walk past there anymore. It's just not worth the risk. Number 3. Andrea. My fiancé Hunter once shared this chilling memory with me, and to this day it serves to remind me that people shouldn't judge others based on their appearance. Here is his story, which happened to him when he was 15. Throughout my life, I spent many days and nights in the hospital, most of them while curled up in a chair next to my dad during his multiple extended stays. His latest visit was the worst one of the lot, and it was caused by him knocking his head against the bathroom sink and going into a series of seizures. The day the accident happened, I was walking my dog Ozzy, and he started tugging frantically against the leash in a way I had never seen. As an empath and spiritual person, I believe the animals can sense things that humans aren't perceptive to, so I let him lead me back towards the house without argument. The house was overly quiet, and when I called to my dad, the sound seemed to echo eerily. As I made my way down the hall near my dad's room, a massive amount of pain-filled energy enveloped me, and it was emanating from the bathroom. In the tiny room was a horrific sight. My father lay on the bathroom floor. His eyes rolled back in his skull, and his skin an unnatural shade of blue. He was laying in his own blood, and at the sight my medical training immediately kicked in. After checking his pulse and rolling him onto his side, like I had been taught by his doctors, I supported his head with towels, and I used a compression technique on the gash of his skull. I called 911. During the ambulance ride, he went into an additional 13 seizures, and it took the doctors putting him into a medically induced coma for them to stop. A few nights after the accident, I was sleeping next to his bed in the ICU when I woke up from a cold breeze. I looked over to my dad, who was sitting upright in his bed with his eyes rolled back. He was attached to tubes and IVs, and I could tell that he still hadn't woken from the coma. Without even taking a breath, he whispered to me in a cold, hard voice, "I don't want you seeing me like this." His back slumped into the pillows, and I sat there in shock. At this point I was already on edge. How had he been able to speak? I needed to clear my mind and maybe talk to his neurologist if I could find him there that late. So I went for a walk around the dimly lit hospital. Every shadow seemed to turn towards me in the nearest silent building. There were no doctors running around tonight, and there seemed to be a lack of other staff. Due to the immense size of the hospital, I ended up getting lost down a long hallway, so I decided to try heading back the way I came. When I was about halfway down one of the many corridors, I saw a lady in a hospital gown. Something was very odd about her, though, and she appeared almost transparent. At first, I thought it was due to my lack of sleep, but upon reaching her, she disappeared. There were no rooms or other hallways nearby that she could have gone down. I shook it off as an exhaustion-induced illusion, and I kept making my way back to my dad's room. About 5 minutes later, I saw the same woman down another hallway, so I decided that she must be real, and I started to follow her to make sure she was okay. She looked even more pale this time, and I was worried that she might be in need of immediate medical attention. 3 more hallways passed by, and then I saw her walk into a room in a part of the hospital I had never been in before. I opened the door slowly, and the figure was standing in the middle of the room with her back to me. As she turned to face me, I almost screamed. Where she should have had eyes, there were just voided holes, and not even pieces of her eyes remained. Her mouth was sewn shut, and her expression was inhumanly blank. I ran from the room in terror, not stopping my frantic dash until I recognized where I was. I had finally found my dad's room, and I had never felt more relieved. After the encounter, I headed back to my chair to try and get some sleep. I kept telling myself that the whole thing was due to the extreme stress I had been under, coupled with the lack of sleep for the last few days. I finally managed to drift off, only to wake from night terrors a few hours later. I got up to use the bathroom and take a shower, and when I went to brush my teeth, there were 5 words written in the steam that had coated the mirror. "Why did you leave me?" As I turned around, I saw a piece of white hospital gown to the side of me, just slightly out of my vision, and I thought for a moment my dad had gotten out of bed. I excitedly went to hug him when I realized that it was that same terrifying spirit. She stood over my dad, with as much of a smile as she could muster through stitched lips, and she touched his forehead as she whispered something to him. I was so scared that I blacked out, and I woke up back in my usual chair. I couldn't feel any bad energy, and my dad's complexion actually looked a little bit less pale than it had been. 2 days later, my dad came out of the coma. At first, he didn't understand where he was, who he was, or who anyone else was. The doctors were amazed that he was awake at all, though, since they had predicted that he may well die while still in the coma. The next few days were rough, as my dad's memory slowly returned, and I forgot all about the apparition. A few days later, I was home alone. I needed a short break from helping my dad reintegrate his memories, and I knew he'd be fine for a few hours, under the care of several kind staff members at the nursing home nearby. I was getting clean clothes from my room when I saw a note on my pillow. I blinked at it, in confusion a few times, then read it thoroughly before dropping it in shock. I hadn't recognized the handwriting, but the paper had the hospital's name printed at the top. "Even though you didn't help me, You're welcome. Signed, Andrea. Chills went up my spine after I read it, and the note haunts me to this day. Andrea, I want to thank you so much for what you did for my dad. I'm not exactly sure what you did or how you did it, but I know you helped him find his way back to me. I'm so sorry that I was a coward and ran from you, and I hope you found peace. To this day, Hunter, 9 years after his ghostly encounter, still has night terrors about meeting such a horrifying being. Sometimes he wakes up in the night screaming, though he never seems to remember doing this, and I can't help but wonder if Andrea is punishing him from beyond the grave. Number 4. I've always enjoyed scary things like horror movies and scary books or stories, and I even listen to stories from this channel when I'm doing chores. So when I hear about encounters or supernatural or unexplained things that have happened to people, I never think it would happen to me. For some context, I'm a very observant person, so I have always heard weird noises and always had an explanation to go with them. But that all changed Friday night of this week. I was laying in bed trying to sleep and not being able to, due to the fact I have breathing problems, and it doesn't let me sleep. I checked my phone and it was 11:59 p.m., and I always remember that number. And that is when I heard a noise that resembled a loud meowing from a cat, but it sounded demonic and scary. In my mind, I was wondering what it was. The noise repeated for about 3 times, and it stopped. Being the person I am, I got up from bed and looked outside my window. I know, never a good idea to do it, and I've seen enough horror movies to know not to do that. But I'm naive, so I did it anyway. And I see nothing, so I closed the window that I had opened because of the hot and humid spring air. I go to the bathroom and do my business, and then I'm washing my hands, and I hear the noise again. I go and look out the window again, and once again I see nothing. So I grab my bat, which is not the cheap plastic one, or not really good wood. It was a genuine MLB model, so we can do a lot of damage. I check the front yard, and then the back. Again I see nothing, and decided just to go back to my room. I left the bat beside my bed, just in case I needed it. I lay there for about 20 minutes, wondering what the noise was, and never will know. The noise sounded so odd to me. It might not be scary to others, but it was to me. Not only will I be checking under my bed for a killer orange cat, I will be looking for something else too. Narrator's note. How did you know that the demonic howling you heard wasn't our killer orange cat? Number 5. The Howling. My fiancée Allana and I have always been into the occult and paranormal. We're the kind of people who used to fantasize about getting to see a cryptid, or exploring a famous haunted location just for the thrill. I have to be careful about being around too much of the dark energy that some haunted locations have, though, since I'm an empath. For anyone not familiar with the term, an empath is defined as a person with a paranormal ability to apprehend the mental or emotional state of another individual. Since childhood, I have learned to manifest my ability, and by now I can absorb emotions from the physical and metaphysical realms. It's a blessing and a curse. Last Tuesday, Allana and I were in the car on our way home from work when our favorite DJ came on the radio. Good evening. This is Mitchell McCarthy on WSK 99.4, and we have a treat for the first person who can call and name this song from the following snippet. This is your last chance to win one of our road trip revelry packages. After a brief pause, the music started playing, and we listened intently. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful... And it stopped. At the stop, the radio host came back on. Now let's see what lucky caller will win this road trip-tastic reward. Lana's mom is a huge fan of older music, so we already knew who it was and what the song was. My fiancée immediately dialed the number, not expecting to be the right caller, but she was. I grinned as she correctly blurted out the right answer, silently high-fiving her. Louis Armstrong. What a wonderful world. The radio host paused dramatically. Then he made a drum roll sound with his hands. Ladies and gents, we have a winner. You know what that means, miss? You and 2 friends have won an all-inclusive road trip to wonderful New Orleans, and you guys will be getting to Louisiana just in time to get some beads. My fiancé got off the phone, grinning from ear to ear. Let's go pick up the tickets, though I know neither one of us is really interested in Mardi Gras. I nodded, thinking about who else we should have tag along with us. Oh, we should bring Co. He's right along the way, and who said we have to go to the Mardi Gras? I'd rather go to the Manchac Swamp, the home of the Rougarou. I think the locals call it the Cajun Werewolf. After getting the hotel tickets and the food and gas vouchers, we packed our bags. I made sure to bring a bunch of extra socks, since I've always hated having wet socks on, and then we called up the office and put in our time off. 2 weeks later, we set off on a road trip from northeast Pennsylvania to the bayou country of Louisiana, and I couldn't remember being more excited for a vacation. The whole ride south, Allana and I discussed our plans for the trip. Neither of us had ever been to Louisiana, or thought we ever would, so we'd never looked up what things were in the area to do. Upon searching Google, we finally made a plan for our week in Louisiana, and it couldn't have been more perfect unless we went in October rather than July. Monday, we would just relax in the hotel, but we weren't staying in just any hotel. The one the radio prize included was the stay at the Dauphine Orleans Hotel, which was located in the French Quarter. This hotel was rumored to be one of the most haunted hotels in Louisiana, and it complemented the theme of our trip perfectly. Tuesday, we would explore the French Quarter and see if we could spot the infamous vampire twins of Louisiana. On Wednesday, we would explore the outskirts of the city and try to find old houses that had been abandoned, as well as visiting some of the famous voodoo shops. Thursday, we would explore the supposedly haunted St. Vincent's Asylum, which was also located in the French Quarter. And then, for the weekend, we would go to the Manchac Swamp and camp. We would search for the Rougarou and for the voodoo princess, Julie White's cabin, that was said to be hidden deep in the Manchac Swamp. As the hours passed, Allana and I would switch off driving through each state, stopping for leg breaks. Finally, 14 hours into the trip, we reached our pit stop for the night. We parked, and my best friend Kendra, who we call Co, in her driveway in Birmingham, Alabama, and it felt great to be out of the car. It was actually our first time meeting him in person, so it was an emotional moment for all of us. He was overjoyed to see his big bro and big sis, and since he was a fairly large man, he squeezed us into his pillow-like frame with gusto. After telling him about our plan for the week, he was eager to pack some camping gear and to read up about local lore. His tone was zealous, and he quickly gathered what he needed. I want to see the giant wolf man of Manchac Swamp. That was the last thing he said before we all went to sleep. And after 14 hours of straight driving, my fiancé and I were so exhausted that even the hardwood floor of Co's bedroom felt like a memory foam mattress. The next morning, we got up around 8:30 and set off on the last 4 hours of the drive. We were so excited to finally be in the voodoo capital of the U.S., and right around mid-afternoon, we reached New Orleans. The minute I stepped into the hotel, the energy hit me like a freight train. It made me physically sick for about an hour, and after checking in to room number 113, we decided to relax and take a nap. We wanted to spend the night with our EVP and heat cameras, trying to find any spirits that were here, and to see if they were as bad as they seemed. None of us could sleep well, though. I'm not sure if it was because of our excitement, or if something more paranormal was keeping us awake. We ate dinner out, and checked out some local attractions, and when the clock hit midnight, we got our equipment unpacked. The EVP meter immediately started going off, worse than at any other place I'd been to. Allana and Co. nearly shit their pants at the sight of how much energy was in our room, and it definitely explained the feeling I had when I first walked into the building. After 20 minutes of setting up cameras and unpacking equipment, we were ready to explore. As we walked through the empty halls of the hotel, we whispered about how odd it was that such a packed hotel would be so silent. In the dead of night, nearly 45 minutes had passed, and nothing was caught on our heat camera, and the EVP device wasn't going off as much as it was initially, so we decided to call it a night, since we would have more time to explore in the upcoming days. The next few days passed, and we were all growing restless over the fact that we hadn't seen anything even remotely paranormal yet. The places we picked should have had at least some kind of interesting vibes, but there wasn't anything. Over dinner on Wednesday night, Allana made a proposal to Ko and I, and we readily agreed. "Babe, can we just cancel the St. Vincent's tour and go to the swamp tomorrow? It seems like all the drunk, living partiers scared away anything paranormal." After she was done talking, I nodded enthusiastically, and Ko breathed a sigh of relief. "Well, thank God, someone else had the same idea." We set off back to the hotel to check out and gather our stuff. After about an hour of packing, we fit everything back into our car. Based off all the legends, this was the part of the swamp that we would be most likely to see the Rougarou in, or find the alleged still-standing witch's cabin. Since I was the only one who was an avid hunter, I was the only one with a gun, and I made sure to pack my .45 caliber pistol with 2 full clips of ammo in case of an emergency. It's common knowledge that large snakes and alligators live in the swamps in Louisiana, so we had figured that we would rather have some means of defense than nothing. After walking for what seemed like hours, we finally decided to take a rest. We had just trekked through one of the roughest parts of the swamp trail, so I immediately changed my socks. I figured that we would use the grime-covered ones as fire fuel later in the night if we couldn't find tinder, and I had plenty with me, so I wasn't worried. Thankfully, it was a warm night in the swamp though, so we didn't need to start a fire at all. The fireflies surrounded us that night, and it was as if there was 1,000,000 stars. It was literally the most beautiful thing any of us had ever seen, and it was so relaxing that we were all dozing off in our camping chairs. That is, until we heard an eardrum-bursting howl that sounded like it was right behind us. I took out my pistol and fired a warning shot. A moment later, the grass behind us parted to reveal a scraggly-looking man with long dark hair. "Please don't shoot me. I wandered onto here an accident, and I don't even know where here is. I heard you guys talking and thought you might know the way out." My fiancée, being the caring person she is, paid no mind to the fact that his clothing was torn up, and he looked a little unhinged. She invited him to sit with us, and even got him a granola bar. After about 10 uncomfortable minutes, I finally spoke up. "So, why are your clothes torn up?" He gave a vague response about how the swamp can beat you up, but he didn't go into detail. I once again tried to get some information out of our strange visitor, though his heavy Cajun accent was a little hard to understand. "Did you see the thing that made that horrendous howl?" He shifted a little, and I could tell he wasn't feeling very comfortable with my questions. He finally replied, after thinking about his response carefully, "Boy, you can call me Jack. Now that we're all friends here, there is no need to worry. I can assure you I'm not one of those beasts. In fact, that howl is what scared me into coming here. I don't know how I got here, though I'm assuming I was drunk after the last week of Mardi Gras." I looked at Ko, as if to give him a "I don't trust him completely" look. Ko immediately returned the look, but we continued to chat amicably. We gave Jack an extra sleeping bag, and told him that he was welcome to sleep in one of our chairs. We said we would show him the way out in the morning, since it was too dangerous to travel in the swamp at night, which he readily agreed to. The next morning we all rose to find Jack was missing. I looked at Allana and shook my head. "Still trust him? You and I both know he had very odd energy." But she sighed and just looked down, knowing I was right. We packed our gear up, hiking further into the swamp. The next few hours went fast, and the heat was blistering. We all just wanted to relax in the water, but even we knew it wasn't wise to swim in bayou water. A few hours later, we finally saw a broken down shack in the middle of the swamp, and we got excited. What if this was the cabin of the voodoo priestess? The shack had been left untouched for a long time, since there was moss growing on everything. We made our way inside the building, and we were immediately weirded out. Laying in the floor was a little hand-sewn doll, and it looked exactly like Jack. We decided to set up camp for the night, but made sure we got well away from the shack. That night was a bit chillier, so we made a fire. We were telling scary stories around it when we again heard a loud howl. No sooner had I put my gun in my hands than Jack came walking out of the swamp. Friends, we meet again. I'm sorry I left so unexpectedly this morning. A big old snake chased me off, and then I got lost until I saw the fire. Mind if I stay with you again tonight? We hesitated, but we didn't want him to get hurt out there, so we agreed. He smiled and thanked us again, and the hours passed quickly as we ate and chatted until we got sleepy. Well, the next morning, the same thing happened. Jack had vanished again, leaving us all extremely concerned. I had decided that if we saw him again tonight, I would stay awake until morning to see where he kept going. We hiked back out of the swamp, double timing it to cover more ground than our previous unhurried pace had done. We had not seen anything out of the normal, other than that doll and Jack, but we still had fun, and we got back to the first campsite relatively fast, though we were all exhausted by then. After setting up camp, I told Ko and Allana my plan for the night, in case Jack came back, and Ko decided he would be staying up with me, because he didn't want to risk me getting harmed. Once again, we heard the howl after sunset, and as expected, Jack came walking out of the swamp behind us right after. We all exchanged a look, and welcomed him back as though nothing had happened. A few hours later, Allana fell asleep, and so did Ko. Despite him saying he would stay up, he finally passed out, and I pretended to, while still keeping an eye on Jack. I must have dozed off at some point, because when I opened my eyes, the fire was out, and Jack was heading into a nearby clump of bushes. I got up and followed him, trying to see where he went in the dim moonlight. "Jack, where are you going?" His response was not what I had expected. Instead of hearing him shout back, I heard the howl again. This time it was behind me. As I turned around, slowly I saw it, the Rougarou, and it was a large, almost humanoid, white wolf with the most blood-red eyes I had ever seen. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I was terrified and I blacked out. Upon waking, I jumped up and looked around, terrified because I was still somewhere in the swamp with that thing. Dawn was just showing, and I stumbled back to camp. I could hear Allana and Ko shouting to me from the distance, and I hurried back to them. They looked worried sick, and we were relieved to be back together. We figured I must have had a night terror, which I was known for, and I must have sleepwalked out of the camp. We made our way out of the swamp, and back to our car, and after packing up quickly, we headed out of Louisiana and back towards Ko's house. On our way home, however, I felt different. I was more hungry than normal. As I looked into the mirror, my normally hazel eyes did something I had never seen before. They flashed blood red, just like that monster I'd seen last night. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. I hope you enjoy these stories. I don't get most of my stories from subscribers. I go in search of them. But occasionally, I really enjoy putting a video together for all of you with your stories. This video was supposed to be out quite a while ago, but my sister and I experienced another attempted break-in of our house the other day. Fortunately, this time the intruder did not get in, but it did cause some delays. Due to this, we are starting to look around for a new place to live. Because, 2 times in a month, after living here for 6 years, is kind of bad. But if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please use the subscribe button and the bell below so you'll be updated whenever a new video comes out. Comment on the video, and I haven't been answering a lot of comments lately, but I plan on getting back to that now that I have a lot more time to do it. So leave me a comment, and hopefully I'll talk to you. Share the video with someone you think might enjoy it. And if you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the address in the description. But whatever you do, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.